Welcome to another edition of We Need to Talk About Movies. Brought to you by banterflix.com. And now, here's your host, Jim McLean.
Hello. Yes, I am indeed your host, Jim McLean, editor-in-chief of Banterflix, a movie review website based here in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Welcome to the latest episode of We Need to Talk About Movies. For the uninitiated out there wondering what this podcast is all about, well, it's pretty straightforward. Each week, we need to talk about a movie. It might be a new release. Remember those? It might be a cult classic. I'm sure, like me, you've been revisiting a lot of those recently. Or a movie you've never heard of before. And I gather together some contributors and we have a light-hearted chat about the movie. Sometimes we do get a little bit spoilerific, but we try our best to warn you if that's the case. But generally, we just try to have a bit of fun along the way, and hopefully you enjoy it too. If this is your first time checking out this podcast, then welcome to the madness. But if you've been listening for a while now, then thank you for continuing to tune in and support the show. This week, we're going to do something slightly different. We're not going to talk about a specific movie. We're going to talk about the state of cinema generally. Because I'm sure you're aware that right now, it's challenging times for the exhibition sector in the film industry. There's a lot of enforced closures of cinemas, not just here in the UK and Ireland, but across the globe due to the COVID pandemic. We have the changing nature of cinematic distribution with the rise of premium video on demand services, PVOD, all that kind of stuff, and a lack of content right now as distributors push a lot of their big hitting blockbusters back to 2021. So I thought we would just have a bit of chat about everything, and I gathered together a great panel for this podcast. I'm joined by Johanna Leech from the Strand Arts Centre here in Belfast, Swney from the Archlight Cinema in Battersea, and film critic and presenter Anna Smith, the host of the Girls on Film podcast. Yes, we were talking about some pretty serious subject matter, but in true Banterflix style, we did have a bit of fun along the way. So I hope you enjoy listening, and without any further ado, let's get stuck into this week's episode. Hi guys, welcome to this special edition of We Need to Talk About Movies. This is a follow-up from a podcast we recorded back in July. Feels like a lifetime ago now, when we talked about cinemas reopening and the challenges that were faced back then. As I say, that feels like a lifetime ago now. Now, here we are. We're coming into December, the end of 2020. And this is a follow-on podcast from that. And we're going to be talking about the state of cinema, the challenges that will be faced by the exhibition centre, not so much for what's left of 2020, but into 2021 and beyond. And I feel like Nick Fury on this podcast, because I have assembled a crack team. And joining me on this special edition of our podcast is Anna Smith, presenter, film critic, presenter, and host of Girls on Film. Hello to you, Anna.
Hi, great to be here.
Thank you for having the time to be on the podcast. We're also joined, one of the few, the only people that have been on this podcast before, is Johanna Leech, programmer from the Strand Arts Centre. Hello to you, Johanna.
Hiya.
And another debutante is Swney, who works with you're the manager, Chris, of the Archlight Cinema in England, in Battersea.
Yes. Hello, nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we are going to solve the crisis that cinema is in. With us four together, we'll solve the problems. We'll solve the tales of woe that 2020 we've seen in 2020 during the COVID pandemic. But before we get into that, because we have some debutantes, I thought we would let yourselves introduce yourselves and tell our viewers and our listeners a little bit about yourselves. And I'm going to start with yourself, Anna. Introduce yourself to the Banterflix Brigade.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Anna Smith. I'm a film critic, broadcaster, and host of the Girls on Film podcast. I've been doing this about 20 years. I was president of the UK Critics Circle for a couple of years, which is great fun. I do a lot of broadcast on BBC and also Sky News, but I cover for Mark Kermode on the film review on BBC News when he's off away, which is always a great gig. Girls on Film is a feminist film podcast, but it's lots of fun. And we do episodes every week, and sometimes we do YouTube episodes with the BFI, have amazing guests on like Carrie Mulligan, Linda Hamilton, Maxine Peake. So I love my job. What can I say? I write about film and I feel lucky, and I talk about film. I feel lucky to be able to be still doing it, even in these circumstances.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. I'm someone, I love cinema. I love kind of being able to talk about it and share my passion for it. So we are kindred spirits that way. And I've listened to Girls on Film. It is a great pod. I'm a couple behind. I think it was just your Halloween episodes. And I think you've got one or two. I think I've been released since. So I'm a little bit behind. But
you're doing quite well. We've had a Truth Seekers episode since then, but yeah, you're doing all right. Good work.
I've got the time at the minute to be able to binge on podcasts. Finally, I've got the time. But as I said, I would definitely recommend it. Now, Johanna, moving on to yourself, you've been on the pod before, but because we have some newbies, that might mean that we have some new listeners. So tell our listeners, and tell the possible new audience about the Strand Arts Centre. And just to let people in, I feel a bit awful because just before we started to record, we let you go into full spiel about the Strand. And then I had to say, that's lovely, but you've got to do it all over again, Johanna, because I'm not recording.
It's my life, constantly talking about the Strand, just representing. So I'm the programme manager of the Strand Arts Centre. We're based in Belfast, in East Belfast. So we're a bit kind of set in the suburbs. We're a bit more of like a cultural community hub. 7 years ago, we became an art centre. So we use the space for workshops, live music and theatre. But obviously, primarily, movies are our main love and or what we do day in, day out. So we've got 4 screens and we do a mixture of stuff. So we've got free film clubs for kids, but we also do cultural film screenings, interactive, immersive screenings, because we've got a live stage that we can use as well. And basically just promoting film in a lovely Art Deco building.
Mm-hmm. And you also let Hallions like Banterflix in to occasionally do screenings. And it feels like a lifetime. I know we nearly had one at Halloween for our Dark Hedges International Film Festival. Unfortunately, the local executive pulled the plug on that. I'm sure we will come back to that. But no, I mean, we're biased here. We love the Strand. We love the Strand. It's the heart of East Belfast. Chris, on to yourself. Tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself and, more importantly, the cinema.
Yes, so my name is Chris. I am the general manager of Archlight Cinema, which was about 1 year old before having to go into lockdown number 1. So we were just kind of starting to really build our audience and find our niche when we had to kind of stop and then do it all over again a couple of months ago when we reopened. So we got really good at it. And then we obviously have closed again for lockdown number 2 with the aim of reopening in December when this lockdown will supposedly be finished. Archlight Cinema is part of, it's an independent cinema, but it's part of a group of cinemas as well. So our sister sites are the Olympic Studios Cinema in Barnes and also the newly opened cinema at Selfridges as well. So we're all 3 individual sites, but kind of under the same umbrella. And if you go to each site, you'll find a lot of commonalities in regards to kind of the seats that we have, the tables that we have on each seats, and the ultimate experience that we kind of cater to our audience as well. And we are part of the ongoing Battersea Power Station development as well. So at the moment, we are just a very small site, 3 small screens situated in 3 archways. So we actually have the overground train that goes over us. We have fully soundproofed though, so it's not a problem. And we will be expanding our operations into the big kind of mothership of the Battersea Power Station itself, hopefully in the next year and a half, if things kind of run on schedule, which they seldom do, but we'll see how we go.
Well, you have sold me. I mean, I normally go to London around the time for the film festival. This time I did it all from the comfort of my home, which was nice, and I was able to kind of sit and watch a lot of films in my pajamas, but it's not quite the same.
No.
It's not the same thing, but you've definitely sold me to kind of pay one of your sites a visit. And just picking up to kind of kick off on this idea of this podcast for the state of cinema. You talked there about, Chris, about kind of getting your groove, kind of post coming out of the first lockdown closure. Tell us a wee bit about that. I suppose now you have the challenges like us here, the socially distant screenings, and getting audiences back and having them the confidence to come back to cinema. How did you kind of approach that? And you kind of talked there, you felt like you were just getting your groove back.
Yeah, the big thing for us really when we came out of the first lockdown was just to instill that confidence in our consumer base and to show that everyone is kind of in this together, and we're still adapting and learning as to what the situation is and was constantly, kind of changing all the time. So our kind of our mission really when we reopened was just to show, we are putting everything in place. We are social distancing our seatings. When we first reopened, we didn't sell. We went kind of above and beyond. So we didn't sell every other row, and we had 2 seat gaps between bookings as well. And for a cinema that seats 60. That goes down. One of our biggest cinema is a 60-seater. That reduces capacity dramatically. But our mandate, our thought process behind that was just, it wasn't really, when we reopened, it wasn't really about to cram them in and to make money by any means. It was to show that we are taking this seriously, and we want to show to our customers and our members, our members are who we are, that we want to open in the right way. And we were confident in doing that, and over time we remained open for about, I think it ended up being about nearly 3 months, and we slowly were able to kind of bring those restrictions down, and we were able to sell more seats. We became aware that we had a lot of consumer confidence, and people felt safe, but also relaxed as well. Cinema is about escapism, and we didn't want to lose that with everything that was going on. So we didn't want people to we wanted to provide a venue that people could, kind of get away from what everything was going on while still finding that balance of also being safe and healthy with our consumers. So we managed to kind of bring those restrictions down somewhat, and we were really, again, finding a nice groove. And then we just got to deja vu and had to kind of we'll do it all over again in December.
Yeah, and it's a similar story, I suppose, with yourself, Johanna, and the Strand. I mean, the cinemas here, we've been closed now in Northern Ireland for about 3 weeks now, I think. Or was it 4 weeks after the kind of enforced closure? The confuddling where, do cinemas have to close? We're not quite certain. Oh, no, sorry, cinemas have to close. I mean, but listening to Chris, I'm sure it's a very familiar sounding story for yourself and the Strand.
Yes, it would be. It's just as well whenever you find it like a day before you have to shut down. So then you have your entire cinema program for a week. You've confirmed all your films with everyone. Your staff are all knowing that they're going to work, and then just taking that away is just rubbish, and whenever we initially heard, we thought, oh, maybe we'll be allowed to have like 15 people in a room, because the way it kind of was described was kind of no more than 15 people kind of in a building. But then they kind of said later on, like the following day after that. So we only really found out the day before we actually did have to close. So it was just very strange. And thankfully, I just have a fantastic operations manager who's been looking after the staff really well and making sure everyone gets furloughed and making sure, that everyone's as secure as they can be. And, if it wasn't for her kind of doing that, it could start to kind of become a really confusing time. And it does really make me think and feel for all of those cinema staff out there, especially some of them on like the, what was the chain that kind of had let a lot of people go?
Swney
World, yeah, just kind of, yeah. Swney World is just absolutely crazy. So, yeah, it is that kind of thing of having to go out and try and sell yourself as a cinema anew again, and then closing, and then having to do that again will be very strange, just like Chris was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, it has been a strange few months. I mean, I find myself, and I'm going to come to you, Anna, but I find at the first lockdown, I find myself really, really actively missing cinema. Properly missing. Like the day it reopened, it was a miserable wet day here, and I was there. I went to see Onward at my local cinema here in Lisburn, and I needed that fix. And that kind of, I've always talked about this, and I'm a broken record, and I know it's not the same for everybody, but cinema's a place I go. It helps my mental health. That's the only way I can say it. And it sounds maybe a bit grandiose to some, but I go there, I can shut out all the stuff that's going on. I can leave my phone in my car, let the lights come down, the big screen light up, and just relax and be taken on a journey and kind of forget myself for 2 hours and then come back and kind of pick up your emotional baggage at the door as you leave and then say, right, I've had a rest for that for a few hours. But how, from you, someone like myself, Anna, who has that passion for cinema, you're working within the industry, you know, how have you found that, the idea of, like, we've had the lockdown and cinemas were back, they were socially distant screenings, and then again, they're now closed again?
It's been really tough, and my heart goes out to everyone, as you say, people like yourselves that work in the industry, and also people who are missing the cinema desperately. What was heartening was the people that were so keen, like yourself, to go back in and support it after so many had to close their doors and then open again. And also, I was so impressed to see all the safety measures that were put in. But I think there was still a problem that a lot of people, certainly in England, weren't really aware that cinemas were open when they were open. The message wasn't really getting through to a lot of people. So I think there was a big sort of PR problem there and a communication problem. But one thing that I do as part of my job is to host Q&As at screenings in cinemas. And that's something I love doing. Much as I've enjoyed doing Zooms and getting into doing things this way, I don't think anything can quite replicate the thrill of sitting at the front of a stage with a bunch of cinema lovers in the audience, talking to a filmmaker and having that connection between everybody, having just watched and enjoyed a film all together, you know. And that's something I used to do probably once a week. I've done, I think, 3 this year. And the first was the very first one in the UK, which I think was in July for Summerland, which felt very special. And then the last, I think, was the last one in England, just the other day before lockdown, for Luxor. And they felt very special. And the people that attended those were very much like yourself, just sort of think, oh my gosh, it is. I had not realized how important this is in my life. And I think maybe that's something we can all take away from this, hopefully, when we come out the other side, not just about cinema, but many other things, that we're learning how to value things, and we're learning how important certain things are in our lives and how unimportant other things are. You know, some people are quite happy putting their feet up at home and watching Netflix or Amazon Prime. Other people really need the cinema. And for those people, I really hope it can, you know, thrive again.
Yeah, I would agree with it. Like on a few points you've raised there, like we've just done a festival here. Okay, yes, it's a very small key horror festival, but we wanted that kind of Q&A aspect. But because of the worries of internet connections dropping out and things like that and things going wrong, we pre-recorded everything. And it's not the same. It's not the same when you're kind of talking to someone about a film and there's no input from an audience. We could have done it that way, but we said, look, it's just easier, and there's time differences with people in LA and people in guy in Argentina. We interviewed, it was just a case of, it's just going to be easy to pre-record, but it definitely wasn't the same. I'm going to ask this question. It's going to seem silly, but it's only something you mentioned, Anna. And it's because we were recording another podcast last night, and we all, as a group, kind of came to that consensus after the recording. Do you think maybe people have taken cinemas for granted? And I'll throw this to yourself and to Chris and Johanna, and feel free if you want to come in again, Anna. But do you think people have maybe taken the cinema for granted? Because we were talking about, and I'm sorry, Johanna, we were talking about the Queen's Film Theatre. And I said, look, it's a cinema I love, but I didn't go to it as much as I would have before. And now my kind of attitude is like, well, I want to get back there. I want to get back to cinema, like the Strand, to cinemas, and just get that space. But just asking yourself, Chris and Johanna, do you think maybe, I know you're kind of coming from a slightly biased perspective, but do you think maybe there's a sense that maybe the community have maybe kind of taken cinemas and that space for granted for a while? I
think it's that kind of say, you know, you don't know what you've got until you don't have it anymore, that kind of thing. I mean, we were really overwhelmed with the amount of support and messages from our relatively small membership base that we have after just a year. But we received a lot of lovely support, and and well wishes from people, both times that we had to lock down. And we know, I think there is a vast difference between an independent cinema and multiplex chain cinema, and they are two different models, and they provide two very different things, and there is a demand and a need for both of those things. If we're talking about taking something for granted, I think people go to an independent cinema because it's not, yes, to go see a film, but also to go have an experience and to kind of do something that's a bit more than just watching Amazon or Netflix at home, but also maybe a bit more than kind of replicating that in a bigger space. They go to places that might have a bit more kind of niche, a bit more boutique feel, a bit more identity. And I think the audiences that Custom knows don't take it for granted. They probably, we would love them to come, all the time, more and more. But I think they do. What I've noticed from a personal level is that we were missed, and we were welcomed back by people quite quickly. I wasn't sure how well we would do when we reopened, and it was quiet. Of course, it was quiet, but we had bums on seats the very first day, which was, it was wonderful.
Yeah. What about yourself, Johanna? Just the same question.
I feel like it's a question or a thing that has always applied to the Strand, because we have been there for 80 years. People just always think we'll always be there. Like, we're part of the furniture, we're part of the scene. That street, the area that we're in, we've got shops and the little kind of, boutique spaces and stuff that are near us, and there's kind of community built up around us. People just have always been used to the Strand being there. So I think we are completely taken for granted, because people just presume that no matter what, we're this big steadfast building in the community, will always be there. And then when we kind of end up talking to people, becoming an art centre, and there was, for a while, we thought potentially if we hadn't become an art centre, we would have closed. And when you had these conversations with people, they were so shocked, as if the world had, hurt them or something. And they were like, but I love the Strand. And I was like, yeah, but when was the last time you were there? Maybe about 5 years ago. Well, so, it is that kind of thing that unfortunately we are actually really taken for granted, because we're kind of pieces of furniture. But it does mean, if we were to ever close, there'd be an absolute uproar, because I think even if people aren't physically going to us, they love and respect our building. They know what we're doing is good. They know why people want to go to the cinema, but they just might not go themselves. So what we kind of have to do is keep reminding people that we're there, and keep reminding them that if they don't go to us, then we could potentially close. We're trying to get a refurbishment, so we're kind of trying to advertise that, and hopefully sometime soon we're probably going to have a big massive fundraising campaign. And we're also doing a thing called Strand Stories, where we're collecting people's kind of ideas and memories of the building. So there are ways that we will be kindly reminding them, but I definitely think we are taken for granted. And hopefully the lockdown will show people again that kind of sense of loss, and hopefully they will come back and support us.
Yeah, I'm based in Lisburn, which is about 20 minutes, maybe even not that, from Belfast. I know we were up the when you reopened, we were there for Lost Boys, because why do you not need an excuse to go see the Lost Boys on the big screen? But this does bring me to, in a roundabout way, I suppose, to one of the big points we're going to have to kind of talk about, is the terms of content. Cinemas might have reopened over the summer. They might have now, they're closed again, hopefully going to be back up and running by December. But cinemas need content. In many ways, some cinemas were almost operating as community cinemas for a while, where it's not a case of that there's not enough content to go, but we'll screen cult classics, maybe get an opportunity from programming to screen things and test our audiences in ways that we never thought of. People always talk about this argument, and this might be a thing where people like us, Anna, critics, will say, well, it's great now that there's not these big blockbusters. It gives us a chance for the indie films to take the opportunity, the spaces in the multiplexes. The one I know that I can think of was St. Francis, when cinemas reopened. And I adore that film. I got to speak to the film's director and writer. And I would champion that film till the cows come home. But I know that here in locally, I mean, I don't think it found an audience at the multiplexes, but it definitely found an audience when the Queen's Film Theatre, because that's the audience that kind of film's geared for. But how big an issue, I know it's a silly question and I'm kind of answering it myself, and I'll start with yourself. And I mean, for cinema, for distributors who kind of promised that they would support cinemas when they reopened, then we had Tenet, which came and it just wasn't the huge blockbuster that it was. And now we see the rise of premium VODs. We now see everything. I think the only thing that hasn't officially moved yet is Wonder Woman. I think Wonder Woman hasn't moved, but we're all waiting for it to pretty much move.
There's news just in the last 24 hours, unofficial, I think. They're looking to move it, but nothing has been announced. But I wouldn't be surprised if it were moved to next year, sadly. But at the moment, it's standing on Christmas Day, which I think would be a lovely Christmas treat. So fingers crossed. But yeah, I mean, to your first point, I think I agree. I mean, for us actually on Girls on Film, it's been an embarrassment of riches this whole summer because we've been spoiled for choice for amazing female-led and female-directed and female-written films like St. Maud, St. Francis that you mentioned, Baby Teeth, Summerland. So many great films that we featured. And that has been amazing to see some people taking a bit of a punt on films like that, who perhaps might not have seen The Wood for the Trees if there'd have been all the tentpole superhero movies out over the summer as planned. So I think that's been really good. And when I spoke to the BFI in one of our YouTube episodes, they said they're seeing a lot more younger people coming through the doors because obviously in the crisis, it tends to be that demographic that feels a bit safer. And that, you know, therefore, some young people have been discovering art house films. So there has been some interesting silver linings, I think, which will help secure the future of cinema, I hope. And in terms of, I mean, obviously all those films were kind of ready to go. In terms of what now is ready to go, I mean, it would take a couple of years at least for us to run out of good films because there's so many great independent films being made all the time. And some are, as we know, being filmed in very sort of careful circumstances at the moment where people are able to do so. But in terms of the thing is, as your other guest will testify, you need the big budget films to keep a cinema going, generally speaking. And this is why the fact that No Time to Die, the James Bond film, caused so many ripples and problems and perhaps was the last straw for Cineworld and picture houses because they were relying on that financially to get bums on seats. So I think the whole of cinema needs to support each other and to be on the same page. At the moment, it's really hard to get that because nobody knows what's going to happen when. And with the big budget movies, obviously, they're so expensive that it's very hard for them to take a punt on a release date in the way that an indie movie can possibly just about afford to take a punt and then to go to VOD if cinemas suddenly shut. I mean, the Bond can't do that. So it's very complex.
Yeah, there's a lot of the complexities there. Like, I suppose my argument at the time when Tenet was out, Chris Nolan never asked for that pressure of being the filmmaker and having the film that would save cinema. And with that, a lot of expectations came with it. I mean, I thought it took me 2 goes, and I'm not sure, Johanna, who runs the Strand social media. I know I got wonderfully trolled by the Strand because I had a terrible viewing experience first watching Tenet first time round at a local multiplex where I had to leave halfway through because it was terrible. And when I went to complain, because I'm that age now where I complain, and there's a lack of ushers, and I was told that a couple of times they went in, but they said we can't go near them because of social distancing. And I was like, right, okay, I'm gone. I went to see it at Queen's Film Theatre and had a completely different. I love the film, but it never asked that pressure. It was a big budget blockbuster. My argument at the time was a film like Unhinged with Russell Crowe, which is a lot lower budget, and I went to see that, and that was, well, for socially, I don't know what you guys think from working from the cinema, but that was a film I felt that had a better chance of being something that would be seen as a safeguarding for cinema. It's lower budget. It's got a star. It's got it all. It's got a star that's going to pull an audience in. A film like Tenet was never going to be able to do that because it had such a high budget that the pressure was always against it. But that's my kind of little ramblings there. Johanna, coming back to yourself and kind of the thought about content and kind of the problems that's pretty much facing that is going to have to be addressed with cinemas.
It is. And, like Anna was saying was that if we don't have these blockbuster movies, we can't stay open. You know, it is a great time for us to be, you know, having films that, you know, usually we wouldn't have, or having multiple kind of more independent arts films, or films that maybe wouldn't have kind of large runs, or holding on to films that we wouldn't usually get to hold on to. But then we're not getting enough audience for it. So as much as I've kind of, you know, I've been able to really enjoy going, oh, I've a really strong program this week, all these films are awesome, no one was coming, you know, and it was heartbreaking, because anyone we spoke to, so we kind of did a, you know, COVID safe come back to the Strand video, and when I went and kind of did some vox pops with people, what I kind of found was, if that person has made it through the door, they were coming back all the time. But getting them over the door was the problem. So you were talking to someone who was like, oh, I was here the other week and it was so quiet, it was great, so I came and I saw this. Or I was talking to one guy who'd came, you know, 3 times that week. And what I kind of thought was, it was getting the people in. So no matter what we were showing, it was the fact that if the people aren't willing to go in through the door, I could be putting on an amazing program, and I don't know if I would be able to get them in, if that makes sense. That's kind of the way I found it was. And our family audiences are just not coming back. So we were like, oh great, there's lots of kind of niche children's films, and there was, and we showed them all. And you know, our audiences that you would get for a big Disney blockbuster, those people weren't coming. And I think those people are probably sitting at home streaming things, and they know kind of like, all right, Amazon Prime's got this, Netflix got that, Disney Plus has this. They can schedule everything, put their kids in front of the TV. Whereas, you know, then bringing that family out again, families have got out of practice for that. And then as soon as if it's a sunny day, they're just going to stay out. So I found it a very strange time, but I definitely enjoyed getting to have some really great films in, and the people who did go did really enjoy them. But it just, for us, is not going to be sustainable.
There's a couple of things that you've mentioned, Joanna, I do want to come back to, because I know you mentioned we were on a Zoom call with Film Hub, and you mentioned about the family audiences, and I do want to come back to that. But just before I come to yourself, Chris, because I know, Joanna, you showed Calm with Horses, which is an Irish production. I don't know, without kind of exact figures, I mean, how did you find an audience for that? Because that's a film I know here at Banterflix we've championed as much as we can. I adored that film. And I can see by your face, because some people may be listening to this, they might not be watching, that you might not want to answer that. But I'm going to have to, unfortunately, put you on the spot.
Well, we tried some things out. So then we were like, right, we're going to show. And like, thank goodness, the distributors were great. So you were having some of the bigger distributors who, instead of charging you 40 to 50%, were charging you 10 to 15% for some of these previous titles. So there were times where we were able to show some nice Irish films. So we did Calm with Horses. Then things like we were able to do Bump Along the Way, and kind of have Brona Gallagher do like a little kind of introduction talk beforehand. And we've got the same kind of handfuls of people coming to it. That's why I was kind of saying to you, I think it's, if they're not coming out to start off with, they're not coming all the time. So I'm kind of, like, once they get over the threshold to come back. But what is it that brings them out? And we thought, again, Tenant would do that, but then Tenant didn't either. So it was, it's very kind of frustrating. So we tried that, and even like coming up when we reopen again, we're gonna, put on, the new Liam Neeson film, just because Liam Neeson's in it. We're gonna be showing Pixie, hoping that because it would have Irish connections, that people will come out. But I just really, I don't know.
There's things I do want to come back to, and there's a thing about Tenet I want to come back to. But Chris, kind of just on that general kind of question about content and how much of a challenge that is going forward, with distributors constantly changing release dates and kind of seeing what's happened with Tenet and the kind of lukewarm box office figures now, pushing stuff back. I think Bond back to April now, or is it?
Bond's back to April the 2nd, so I think it's now exactly a year since it was the very first release that I think was April 2nd, so it's now been pushed back a full year. My view for starters, I actually think Tenet did pretty well over here, considering what it had to deal with. I agree with you. I think that there was too much pressure placed on one particular film to quote, save cinema. I just think that was an unrealistic expectation straight away, particularly a film by Christopher Nolan that whatever your view on it. I mean, I saw Tenet twice and I understood it less the second time. But that's a tough film to bring everyone back to the cinema anyway, in the midst of a global pandemic. So I think that from my very narrow, sheltered view of Archlight Cinema, small indie cinema, I'm glad that it can't. Without it, we probably wouldn't have reopened at all, and it served its purpose that way. But also, we have been able to screen smaller films that we probably would have screened them anyway, but we just screen them a lot sooner than normally. We maybe wait 3, 4, 5 weeks before we will get that on our program. We're now playing them day and date because we're just desperate for content to play. And I never thought I would be so happy about Netflix, because they have come through big time in terms of releasing films 2 to 3 weeks before their debut on Netflix. Things like Trial of the Chicago 7 and Rebecca, and then Apple releasing On the Rocks. These films have all done relatively well for us because you can't see them anywhere else, even if it is just for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks. It is that kind of exclusivity arrangement, and people do want to go to the cinema. But I totally also get what Johanna is saying in that frustration. It is frustrating about how do we get people in, because cinemas are, this could be a controversial opinion, but cinemas are safe to go to. Show me a cinema that's had an outbreak. Show me there hasn't been. Cinemas are doing the work and are safe venues, and I think that message just is just not out there.
Well, I think I saw a thing. Was it from Mark Cousins? Retweeted or tweeted a kind of factoid that there was very few, if any, cinemas. I could be wrong here, so it's not a fact, but I mean, I think he tweeted out kind of a figure that very few cinemas had been traced back as hotspots for COVID. I know I feel safe. In all honesty, I went to cinema by the time they'd reopened, probably maybe about 10, even maybe more off the top of my head. I know I went to see stuff like Stage Mother. I mentioned St. Francis, Tenet a couple of times, Unhinged. I'm trying to think of other films off the top of my head. I know there was a few. Bill and Ted, I know I went to go see. I had definitely mixed feelings about that. The less said about that, the better for now. I know a lot of critics loved it. I just maybe old and grumpy. But I don't know. And I just want to ask, because you mentioned, Chris, there, the likes of Netflix and the likes of Apple. Disney, I know, everyone at the start was very, I think was it Universal kind of started the premium VOD, and everybody really kind of, there was an outcry about that with Trolls 2. Who thought Trolls 2 would prove to be so controversial with premium VOD? But I know, as I sit here now, and as I say, it's nearly the end of the year, I haven't dabbled with premium. I haven't been tempted. Maybe that's because sometimes I get some stuff with screeners. I'm slightly privileged that way, but I haven't felt the need to do anything on premium content. Even Mulan, which I was looking forward to, I've kind of made a stand and said, look, I'll just wait till it's available on Disney Plus. And I was under the understanding with Disney Plus at the time that they would release the film on Disney Plus as a premium service only where cinemas weren't reopened. But if it was, I don't know, this is the way I read it at the time, that it would be available in cinemas, but that's obviously not been the case. I mean, Anna, have you seen Milan yet? Have you taken the plunge and paid for it, or?
Well, I had the very rare and privileged experience of seeing it just before lockdown, just before the UK planned premiere, because I was due to be interviewing Nikki Caro for Girls on Film, and as I was sitting in the screening, I think they were beginning to make plans to unfortunately delay the release because everything was escalating so fast with COVID. I really enjoyed seeing it on the big screen. I thought it was a fabulous experience, and I wouldn't particularly want to have watched that on the small screen because it's such about action and spectacle, So I thought that was a real shame when that went to the small screen. And yeah, I mean, like you, I'm probably not the best person to ask about my own personal premium VOD habits, because I get to see everything. I'm fortunate enough to get screeners for everything pretty much as part of my job. But I do know friends that, especially if they've got kids, they will pay, 20 quid for something they can sit down and watch as a family. And I totally get that. But let's just hope that, as Johanna was saying, that those people will then take their kids back into cinemas when they can and they feel safe to, because it is a bit worrying if people are slipping into habits that keep them away from cinemas, even though they've every right to do that, of course. But it would be a shame if they forgot about the magic of cinema.
Yeah. Johanna, just on that point, because I mean, there is, anytime we discussed this at the time when the premium VOD stuff started, and it's been muted for a long time, it was just that basically the COVID situation was the catalyst for it all. Studios have been pushing for this type of idea and narrowing the release window for years. They've been having this discussion. COVID kind of basically, there was no cards left to be played. All cards were with the distributors. But the argument was, as Anna's kind of alluded to, you could argue that a premium VOD price could be cheaper for some families to go to the cinema by the time you add on, because popcorn and stuff, it is an essential. It is essential for a trip to the cinema. And you could argue that since that was cheaper, but it's not the same. It's not the same. And just, you mentioned that. Do you think it's just down to kind of families and kind of, I suppose, a bit of all? I'm answering my own question here, but families being worried about kind of safety and kind of the current climate, or do you think it is kind of PVOD has kind of ate into that market big time?
I think that potentially it has. I think it's, I'm not a parent, but if I'm trying to keep myself occupied in a day, that could be difficult. Never mind if it was 3 other small people. You have to think of that, and confined into one house. So I do think there will be a lot of leaning on the TV as this space and this place to go to, especially if you're going to be confined in a house. And the more you get used to that, and the more that you have that space where it is where you get your entertainment from, and also you're trying to avoid to go out, you're worried about kids' health, your health, family members' health, it is a complete minefield. And if you're getting to that practice of, this is my family space, this is where the kids play in here, and this is where we have entertainment, and we go out for a walk and we come back every day. But I think, especially if they're handed things like you're saying, Trolls 2 went out, and we were quite worried that when we reopened, we actually took Trolls 2 in, and people did come out to see it. That actually was one people did come out to see. So I was quite surprised. And I think that idea of, if Milan was also on the big screen, I think people would come out too, because of the spectacle of it. And like, Anna, what you were saying was like, I haven't seen it. I haven't watched it because I want to see it in the big screen. I'm like holding off for some day or reason where I can get it screened in the Strand just to watch it on the big screen. And I think, and Trolls 2 has that kind of big kids blockbuster, big fun, let's sing along, let's all stand up in the cinema afterwards and sing, run around. That's what the kids do. And I think it's maybe, I
like the way, Johanna, you clarified the kids. I was just imagining that's what you do.
Maybe. But you know what I mean? It's just that excitement that kids have, and to hold on to that is really precious. And I think the longer it's been since parents have saw those kids be in the cinema, being immersed by that, having that emotional connection, singing their little hearts out to songs, and just engaging with something, they've probably forgotten what it's like. And I think, there is that point as well, you're going to save money from not buying confectionery. But we are going to get to a point of mental health and being lethargic about being in your house. And it's going to be that point where capturing that big screen feeling is going to be really important. So I kind of really hope that also we need the distributors to come along with us on this journey of helping us get these the family audience back in, by not necessarily putting things on VOD. And I was absolutely disgusted by The Witches coming out recently, and it's like £16 or £18
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to watch it. You know, I grew up with the Roald Dahl. You know, that was my film whenever I was growing up, and absolutely adored it. And even as an adult now, I love watching it. And when the remake was coming out, I was like, oh, I have to watch this. And I looked up the price of it the other day, and I was so angry. It's like, I am not paying that. I'm not paying that. And also, I'm annoyed because the kids, and I'm annoyed for Milan too, that the distributors have taken away that experience for them. It's been taken away from them seeing those films in the big screen and the importance of that.
Just to kind of cut in, Johanna, and I don't know, Chris, you might know this as well, but I mean, is the possibility of Milan being screened, you know, is that at some point that has got to become a possibility? Or is that kind of going to be tricky now with the way they're kind of working with that?
I feel like maybe, I mean, if we're looking at it as a case-by-case basis, the ship is probably well and truly sailed with Mulan, because it's been on, it's existed on PVOD for a while. I think it's out on Disney Plus in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I think they definitely could have, we would have comfortably screened Mulan even at the same time it went on PVOD, and we would have had audiences and we would have had people come for exactly the reason that, you know, Johanna says, it's to watch it on a big screen. It's a spectacle film. I think that definitely would have. So it was disappointing that happened. I think another more recent example. It's heartbreaking that Soul is going straight to Disney Plus. I was fortunate to see that for the London Film Festival on the big screen, and it's Pixar's best thing they've ever done, and you need to see it on a big screen. And it's so heartbreaking to know that won't be a possibility. But in saying that, if that option was there for it to be on Disney Plus and for cinemas to screen it at the same time, people would come and see it. It would work. The Secret Garden is another example that was on Sky. That went straight to Sky. We played it day and date, and I think we had the opposite, Johanna, in that we actually had, you know, this was during half term. We had families come because they were just desperate for something to do and desperate to get out of the house.
We were closed.
Yeah. So but you know, that was available relatively, you know, free to people who have a Sky subscription to watch at home, but they still, you know, people still go and see that. I think it was maybe number 2 at the UK box office for the first couple of weeks it was out. So I think the proof is there that there can be a relatively harmonious relationship between films that are released in the cinema at the same time are released in other mediums. It's all about, you know, needing to adapt.
Well, I think when you look at it now, I know it's only come to Disney Plus fairly recently, but Onward, I think, has been frequenting the box office top 10 now for quite some time. And whether or not that's viewed as evidence of proof that I've always talked about this, you know, audiences have the choice. You know, on Universal, I think Universal are behind Trolls World Tour. They kind of viewed it as a huge success, that they would have made as much money from PVOD, from releasing it in the cinema, as they would from just the strategy from the PVOD. And my argument was, well, the people didn't have a choice. If they really wanted, if you were that keen to watch Trolls World Tour, look, I love the first Trolls movie. I cried a little. I'm not ashamed to admit I am that emotional wreck of a person. I cried at Trolls. Let's not go down that kind of pull on that thread. I cry at a lot of movies. Disney, Pixar are usually the best at making me cry. But audiences didn't have that choice, you know, so you can't really judge something to be a huge success. If cinemas are closed and people can't go to them, to say that this is the way forward with PVOD when people don't have the choice. So I'm just kind of wondering, you know, so I think it goes Disney Plus. Is it Christmas Day?
Christmas Day, yeah.
And I didn't get a chance I don't know if it was on the digital press, the screeners for the London Film Festival. Got to see some great stuff. I know, like, Possessor is out. I think it's VOD. I don't know if it's cinematic or VOD. What way it's been released at the end. I think it's
both. I think that's another PVOD, and then I think when cinemas in England can reopen, it's available to book.
Okay, because I mean, I've been championing it since I saw that at the London Film Festival. I thought it was great. But no, Soul, I was surprised to see that attitude, because I'm kind of off the top of my head without looking at release dates and stuff. I think the next big family film that is potentially getting a theatrical release. Is it The Croods 2? Is that the kind of... that I didn't even know The Croods 2 existed until I think I was looking about a few months ago. I think it's the next big thing that's getting theatrically released.
I think the UK is getting that next year.
Okay.
I think for us it's Peter Rabbit 2, but that's probably very likely will be moved again as well, I would suspect.
It's mid-December, or supposed to be.
Yeah.
Who would have thought Peter Rabbit would be possibly saving cinema?
Stop saying that there's a film that's saving cinemas, Jim. It's not catchy.
No, do you know what? Do you know what, Johanna? In the recent days, I have come up with this theory, right? There is a film that is going to save cinema. And one of our very own from here in Northern Ireland is in it. Jamie Dornan and Wild Mountain Thyme. It's going to save cinema. It is literally... Look, see if I'm proven wrong on this. Because I think if you were to release that, I'm not sure when it's getting released, but if you were to release that and cinemas were open, I guarantee you, socially distanced or not, there would be bums and seats for that, for people would want to go and see just how bad it is. How bad are those accents? And then they'd be go back home. Pubs are possibly still closed, whatever, in this world that I'm kind of conjuring in my head. And they would be like, was that as bad as we thought it was? Let's go back again. Look, you can say if I'm wrong, Anna. I don't know where you're going to weigh in on this. I'm going to say this statement. Wild Mountain Thyme is going to save cinema.
Wow. You've heard it here first. That's it.
I do have to see it now. I actually haven't seen it. So that's okay. That's one for a completist.
I've seen the ad and that's enough. But I have to say, Jamie is so lovely and he's a big supporter of the Strand. So, I'm a bit, I have to kind of not comment officially on it.
Well, I was doing an interview for I think it's the film The Racer that's out in the middle of December, and I was talking to one of the stars of it, Tara Lee, and we had a quite heated discussion because she's a Southern actress, and she's like, Jamie Dornan's from Ireland. He's from Northern Ireland. How can he not do an Irish accent? But this is, I think, venturing into a segue. Look, we all remember Pierce Brosnan and his terrible attempt at an Irish accent, so it's not unheard of before. But I suppose that's the thing that the media will always do. The media will always kind of, and I've just done it by talking about films that are going to save cinema, but there is going to be that pressure on what is going to be the next big release. But it's not, I come back to the point I made earlier on with Tenet. It's not going to be a film that's a huge budgeted film. It's going to be probably, as someone who loves horror, it's going to be a low budget horror, something along the lines of Paranormal Activity that cost next to nothing to make and then finds a huge audience. That's the type of film that is likely to kind of give encouragement to studios to release their stuff theatrically. Feel free.
Or like you said, maybe something like Onward, or something that just stays on for quite a while, or like a kids film that stays on for a long period of time. You'd always be surprised at what people keep going back to. Well,
I'm sure if you were to screen tomorrow, The Greatest Showman, you would probably get a large audience to that. I don't know. I like the film. I don't love the film. But, we are venturing. Our hour's nearly up. I don't quite feel we've saved cinema just yet. This is the point where you guys throw in your thoughts, generally kind of, is anything at the stage that we haven't really touched, anything we haven't addressed right now that you feel that we need to kind of talk about right now?
I think for me, it's just encouraging people to get out there as soon as possible when they can and they feel safe to do so. And like Johanna said, not taking it for granted, and remembering how much we love cinema. And that's certainly something we've been trying to do on Girls on Film, is just to encourage people to get out there, because it's, do you know what? Who's going to save cinemas? Audience. It's not going to be a film. It's going to be audiences.
I'm sorry, Anna. It's going to be Wild Mountain Thyme. I'm sorry. I'm going to stick by that. It's going to be Wild Mountain Thyme. I will get a T-shirt made, and if I am proven wrong, I will never wear it. But Jamie can do it. I believe I believe he can do it, and Emily Blunt can do no wrong. Say no more. But no. So I cut in Anna halfway through with just a quick gag. That's what I went in there for. I apologize. I cut in and you were in mid-flow.
I made my point. Audiences can save cinema. Do it. Okay.
Johanna, Chris, anything else you want to bring up just before I suppose I do let you go, because I'm sure there's things you could be doing better than sitting chatting to me about Wild Mountain Thyme. I know after this recording, you're all going to go and watch the trailer again.
Yeah, again, just. No, I agree with Anna, and I think what we kind of I had ranted about was if distributors, and I think, Anna had said this as well, and Chris, is that if people don't know the cinemas are open, it's one thing, there's no marketing that's being put in. Now, there is campaigns, don't get me wrong, there is Back to Cinema campaigns, which we've been part of, and UK Cinema Association have been fantastic at trying to get people back. But if we had the distributors putting in money to a campaign altogether, pushing to go back to cinema, and, like saying, it is so safe, and we want people in so much that we are being so careful about cleaning and doing everything that we can to get people back. And, we tried to make a little video about getting people back to the Strand ourselves, but where is this campaign, or where is this money that's being put in? What's the point in trying to market, this movie when you could put all your marketing money together and just be like, go to cinema?
Just on that point, Joanna, I mean, you're talking there about marketing. That's, I suppose, probably through social media. I suppose is probably the most logistically easiest way and most cost-effective way. But that's then probably targeting a very specific audience. I'm thinking of my mother. My mother has Facebook, but she does not, and I'm not just tarnishing all mothers at this point, but I mean, we talk about, and I hate the term, but the grey pound has, over in recent years, become so important for cinema. Is a social media campaign the best way to reach that audience, who are probably right now in the current situation, probably one of the toughest audiences to potentially, I don't know, I could be wrong. Chris and Joanna, you're coming up with this first-hand experience. I would imagine that's probably one of the harder audiences.
But that's the audiences you should be shielding. Yeah. You shouldn't be trying to get out. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying we forget about those people now, and they will have a time to come back. And I miss doing my silver screenings with groups that we have that would have came in and watched classic movies with us. But I think that's what we need to get. We need to get to people who are young and capable enough, confident enough, and feel safe enough to get back. And I do think actually social media and trying to get things in kind of local news is really important.
But then,
and I think it's a bit of a. I was just going to say, like, adding on to that, I completely agree with you. They're only going to go and see new things, though. They're not a classic audience. People who can go to a cinema, they will go and watch something new. So we need new stuff. And I think there is a real lack of thinking long term about this, because this is going to go away. This is going to end. Maybe, just maybe, a studio has to, for the greater good, sacrifice a Death on the Nile for a Black Widow better result later. They just need, instead of retaining all of their content, you got to give us something to, otherwise, really, and it is a genuine fear and threat that there just won't be cinemas around to play these films when it is okay. It's got to be, the conversation, I feel, is there and it's happening, but I just don't think it's happening enough, or it's happening strong enough for results to come through when they're needed, which is now.
Yeah. Well, I think the studio that's big enough in the past to absorb losses, is probably no way of putting it, has been Disney in the past. We think, for all the Marvel stuff they've put out, they have the occasional kind of bomb. I think like John Carter, or of Mars, all the kind of stuff. There's every so I'm thinking of the one with George Clooney, which I have a soft spot for, but I can't, Tomorrowland, which I have a soft spot. I know there's problematic issues with it, but I have a soft spot for that film. But I think, is it today? I mean, I was reading, Disney, their big problem now is the fact that their parks are closed. That's where they're big. They've always had that park in the past to kind of absorb any losses, and that's been a big part for them. But I suppose that's kind of clarified their thinking. But no, I do agree with you, Chris, on that. I'm trying to think, is there anything else before we wrap things up and we all agree as a group that in 2021, Wild Mountain Time will save cinema? Is anything else anybody wants to kind of throw out there?
Just that because we're on this podcast does not mean that we completely agree with Jim.
That's okay. I'm going to edit that out, Joanna, so that'll not make the cut. I have all your words. I'll be able to make it sound that you love Wild Mountain Time. But it is.
We will be trailering Wild Mountain Time ahead of everything as soon as we reopen, Jim. I promise you that. I would just say, buy gift cards. Yeah. Buy gift cards to cinemas. Buy gift cards. Buy memberships. that's how you can help. It's really, that's the big thing is just buy a gift card, use it like buy now, use it later. It means the world to small independent cinemas.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more. So look, I think I don't think we've answered all the big questions and the big problems that are facing cinema right now. But in a way, in 2021, as we I think Anna, you mentioned earlier on, like films are still being made. You know, the industry's still in a massive focus to get stuff. I think the new Jurassic Park film, I think, is just wrapped. Speaking to a couple of Irish filmmakers, stuff's still being made. So there's going to be a glut of stuff. So potentially 2021 might just be the greatest year for cinema ever, with all the stuff that's left over from 2020. So these are positive things to leave this podcast on. So I feel we shall bring things to a close, and all that is really left for me to do now is thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Johanna.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
So that pretty much brings this episode of We Need to Talk About Movies to a close. All that's left for me to do now is some general housekeeping. If you've enjoyed the podcast, then don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasting fix to make sure you never miss a single episode of We Need to Talk About Movies. And if you've only started to listen and you want to go through our back catalogue, then you can do so at the Banterflix website, www.banterflix.com. And there's over 100 episodes of We Need to Talk About Movies where you can listen at your leisure. If you have enjoyed the podcast, maybe you've been listening to us for a while, what I would kindly ask, if you have the time, is leave us a nice review wherever you get your podcasting fix, because that helps attract new listeners to the show, and it's completely free from on your behalf. It doesn't cost you anything. If you do really enjoy the podcast, and if you like what Banterflix is all about, then you can also check out our Patreon page. We've 3 different tiers there, each have their own perks, but all of them give you access to a special episode we're going to do on a month-by-month basis. It's the Banterflix Cinematic Ramble. There's no set theme, no set topic. We just generally gather together some contributors, some members of the team, and have a chat about what we've been watching over the past month. It's a lot of fun. If you think our normal podcasts are rambly, wait till you hear the Banterflix Cinematic Ramble. That's all I can say. And there's loads of different things there. There's 3 different tiers. Some of the tiers even give you some free merch. And, in 2021, we might be able to get back to doing events, and Patreons get discounted admission. And we're also hoping to be able to do Patreon-only events. So yeah, there's loads there. Check it out again on the Banterflix website, www.banterflix.com. That is enough of me doing all the boring stuff. But I've been your host, Jim McLean, editor-in-chief of the Banterflix Movie Review website. We'll be back next week with another episode of We Need to Talk About Movies. But for now, until then, goodbye.
This has been We Need to Talk About Movies. Thanks for listening. For more information, visit banterflix.com. See you next time.